I had just dozed off in front of the television, still in my work clothes, boots unlaced but not removed, the day's exhaustion pinning me to the couch like a weight I couldn't shake. 14 hours at the factory does that to a man. It drains everything except the instinct to close your eyes wherever you land. The glow from the screen flickered across the living room. Some late-night talk show I wasn't really watching. Just noise to fill the silence of an empty house. My wife had been gone 3 years now, and I'd gotten used to nights like this. Quiet, lonely, predictable. But then came the knock. Not the polite tap of a neighbor or the rhythmic pattern of someone delivering a package. This was different. Violent. Desperate. The kind of sound that punches through sleep and sends adrenaline flooding through your veins before your brain even catches up. I jerked awake, heart hammering, and stumbled to the door, my mind racing through possibilities. Accident, emergency, police. Nothing good knocks like that at 1 in the morning. I yanked the door open and the cold night air hit me first, sharp and biting, carrying with it the yellow glow of the porch light that barely illuminated what I saw next. My daughter collapsed against the door frame, one hand gripping the wood for support, the other wrapped protectively around her stomach. Her left eye was swollen nearly shut, a dark purple bloom spreading across her cheekbone. Her lip was split, a thin line of dried blood trailing down to her chin. She was shaking, whether from cold or shock or pain, I couldn't tell. Maybe all three. Our eyes met, and I watched hers fill with tears, the kind that come from a place deeper than physical hurt, the kind that carry shame and fear and the shattering of everything you thought your life was supposed to be. "Dad," she whispered, and the word broke in her throat. He hit me. Because of her. Because of his mistress. Time did something strange in that moment. It slowed and accelerated simultaneously. I felt the rage rising in my chest like molten iron, the primal fury of a father seeing his child destroyed by someone who promised to protect her. Every instinct screamed at me to get in my truck, drive to that house, and make him understand what it feels like to be broken. But she was falling, and I caught her, wrapping my arms around her as carefully as I could while she sobbed into my shoulder, her whole body trembling with the force of it. I guided her inside, kicked the door shut behind us, and helped her to the couch where I'd been sleeping minutes before. The television was still playing, its cheerful voices now grotesque against the reality unfolding in my living room. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and called for a taxi to take us to the hospital. My old truck was reliable, but my daughter needed to lie down, needed comfort I couldn't provide while navigating dark roads with my vision blurred by tears I refused to let fall. Not yet. Not in front of her. She needed me steady. As I sat beside her, holding an ice pack against her face while we waited, something fundamental shifted inside me. I had been her father for 32 years, had taught her to ride a bike and help with homework, and walked her down the aisle to a man I thought would treasure her the way I did. But that night, sitting in the dim light of my living room with her blood on my shirt and her pain radiating through the silence between us, I stopped being just her dad. I became something else. Something colder, more deliberate. I became the man who would destroy the person who did this to her, not with fists or violence, but with something far more permanent. He had mistaken my quiet for weakness, my kindness for surrender. He was about to learn the difference between a man who avoids confrontation and a man who chooses his battles with precision. And this battle, this one was already won in my mind. He just didn't know it yet. I've never been the kind of man who draws attention. No badge on my chest, no dramatic stories to tell at parties. I'm a factory maintenance supervisor, which means I spend my days fixing machinery that breaks down, troubleshooting systems that fail, and teaching younger guys how to solve problems methodically instead of just hitting things with a wrench and hoping for the best. I clock in, I do the work, I clock out. I pay my mortgage on time, keep my lawn trimmed, and believe, or believed, that if you mind your own business and treat people with basic decency, life will generally leave you alone. I'm not a fighter. Never have been. I'm the guy who diffuses arguments at work, who stays calm when everyone else is panicking, who believes that most problems have solutions if you're patient enough to find them. Which is probably why, 3 years ago, when I walked my daughter down the aisle and placed her hand in his, I trusted him completely. He seemed solid. respectful, had a decent job, didn't drink too much, looked at her the way I thought a man should look at the woman he loves. I remember shaking his hand that day and thinking, she'll be safe with him. She'll be happy. God, what a fool I was. Sitting in that hospital waiting room at 2:30 in the morning, I kept replaying that handshake in my mind, wondering how I could have been so blind. The emergency room doctor was young, professional, speaking in that careful tone they use when they're trying not to make things worse. He showed me the x-rays, pointing to shadows and lines I didn't fully understand but knew were bad. He listed the injuries like items on a grocery receipt: contusions across her ribs, possible hairline fracture, soft tissue damage consistent with blunt force trauma. The clinical language couldn't hide what it really meant. Her husband had beaten her badly enough to potentially break bones. I sat there nodding, absorbing information, while inside I was screaming. How did I not see this? How long has this been going on? What kind of father doesn't notice his daughter is being destroyed? When they finally let me back to see her, she was sitting up in the hospital bed, phone clutched in her hand, face pale beneath the bruising. I caught a glimpse of the screen before she quickly turned it away. Messages, dozens of them, all from him. I could see enough to recognize the tone even without reading the words. Threatening, possessive, the digital equivalent of his fists. She tried to hide it, stuffing the phone under the blanket, but I'd already seen. I didn't push. Not then. She was fragile, traumatized, and the last thing she needed was me demanding answers or making her feel more shame than she already carried. But I made a decision in that moment, standing beside her hospital bed with the fluorescent lights humming overhead and the smell of antiseptic burning my nostrils. I might not wear a badge, I might not have authority or power in any traditional sense, but I knew how to build things, how to take broken systems and make them work again, how to document, how to gather evidence, how to be patient and methodical and thorough. And that's exactly what I was going to do. I was going to build a case. I brought my daughter home the next morning, and she moved through my house like a ghost, silent and hollow-eyed, carrying nothing but the clothes she'd worn and the phone she kept checking compulsively. She went straight to her old bedroom, the one I'd kept exactly as she left it when she moved out after the wedding, and closed the door. I heard the lock click. For the next 2 days, she barely came out except to use the bathroom, and I didn't force it. Grief and trauma need space. What I could do, what I understood how to do, was document. I took photographs of every bruise, every mark, making sure the timestamp function on my camera was enabled. I made copies of the hospital report, filing one set in a folder and scanning another to a cloud drive I set up specifically for this purpose. I even walked next door and asked my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, if a doorbell camera had caught anything the night my daughter arrived. She pulled up the footage without asking questions. Bless her. And I recorded it on my phone. Grainy but clear enough to show my daughter stumbling up my porch steps at 1:14 in the morning, injured and alone. Every piece of evidence went into the folder. But evidence, I was quickly learning, doesn't matter much when the community has already chosen its narrative. I went to the grocery store 3 days later, needing to restock the fridge now that I was feeding 2 people, and the whispers started the moment I walked through the automatic doors. I pretended not to notice at first, focusing on my list. But it's impossible to ignore when 2 women in the produce section stop talking the instant you round the corner, then resume in lower voices as soon as you pass. At the checkout line, I heard it clearly. The cashier, a woman I'd known for years, was talking to the bagger. I heard she just showed up at her dad's in the middle of the night, she said, scanning items without looking at me, making all these accusations. But you know how she is. Always been dramatic. The bagger nodded enthusiastically. And is such a good guy, right? My husband borrowed tools from him last month. Super generous. He provides everything for her. Nice house, new car. What more does she want? I paid in silence, took my bags, and left. But the poison had already spread through my veins. The town liked him. Of course they did. He was charming, always ready with a joke. The kind of guy who lent money and showed up to help neighbors move. He'd built a persona so carefully that when his wife appeared with a black eye and a story about his mistress, people assumed she was lying. The victim became the villain, and the abuser got sympathy. That evening, I found something slipped under my front door. A piece of paper, folded once, no envelope. The message was printed, not handwritten, probably from a library computer or somewhere else untraceable. It read, "Drop it or you'll lose more than a daughter." My hand shook as I held it, not from fear but from rage. Someone was watching. Someone knew. And instead of helping, they were threatening. I smoothed the paper out carefully, slipped it into a plastic sleeve, and added it to my folder. Let them threaten. Every threat was evidence. Every whisper was proof of conspiracy. Every attempt to silence us just built my case stronger. I went to the dollar store that night and bought a cheap prepaid phone and a small spiral notebook. If the whole town wanted to play blind, if they wanted to protect a man who beat his wife because he had the audacity to be likable, then fine. I'd work around them. I'd document every single thing until I had so much evidence that not even the most charming smile could explain it away. Judges don't care about gossip. They care about facts. And I was going to give them facts until they drowned in them. It took almost a week before my daughter could talk about her without breaking down completely. We were sitting at the kitchen table, late afternoon sun filtering through the curtains, and she was picking at a sandwich she hadn't eaten when she finally said it. "There's someone else. A woman. She was there sometimes when he..." She couldn't finish, but she didn't need to. She laughed, Dad. When he hit me, she laughed. I didn't react outwardly. I nodded, kept my voice level, asked gentle questions. Where did they meet? How often? Did she know the woman's name? My daughter gave me what she could, fragments of overheard conversations and glimpses of text messages, but it was enough. The son-in-law went to a bar called Rusty's every Friday night, a dive on the edge of town where the beer was cheap and nobody asked questions. So the following Friday, I drove my old sedan, not the truck everyone recognized, and parked 3 spaces down from the entrance with a clear view of the door. I'd borrowed a decent camera from a guy at work who did wildlife photography, nothing professional but good enough for what I needed. I waited. Patience is a skill you develop after 30 years of maintenance work, of sitting with malfunctioning equipment until you understand its patterns. At 9:43, he arrived. And he wasn't alone. She wore a bright red dress, the kind that demanded attention, and heels that clicked against the pavement as they walked in together, his arm around her waist, her laugh carrying across the parking lot. I took photos, timestamps on, through the bar's front window. I captured them at a corner booth, leaning close, his hand on her thigh, her fingers running through his hair. 2 hours later, they stumbled out, drunk and careless, and drove separately to a motel 6 blocks away. I followed at a distance, documenting everything. License plates, the room number, the lights going on, and then, an hour later, off. It was textbook infidelity, the kind of evidence that destroys divorce settlements. But I needed more than just proof of cheating. I needed leverage. It took 3 days of quiet surveillance to learn her patterns. She worked mornings at a salon, had coffee most afternoons at a cafe downtown. On Tuesday, I walked in and sat at the table next to Hayes, ordered black coffee I didn't want, and waited until she was alone, scrolling through her phone. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice calm and unthreatening. "Are you Christina?" She looked up, confused but not alarmed. "Yeah, do I know you?" I slid an envelope across the table. "I'm the father of the woman your boyfriend beats. I think you should see these." Her face went white as she opened it. Inside were printed photos, her and him at the bar, at the motel, kissing in parking lots. But also something else, documents I'd found through some creative searching and a helpful clerk at the counter records office who owed me a favor. Financial papers showing transfers from my daughter's accounts, forged signatures on loan applications, a document promising Christina a percentage of an inheritance that didn't exist yet, contingent on my daughter's unfortunate accident or disappearance. He'd been planning this, using both of them. Christina's hands shook as she read. "I didn't. He said she was abusive. He said he needed to protect himself financially in case she..." "In case she what?" I interrupted gently. "In case she died? In case he killed her and made it look like something else." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "You can either go down with him for fraud and conspiracy," I said quietly. Or you can tell the truth and walk away. He's using you. The inheritance he promised. It doesn't exist unless something happens to my daughter. You're not his lover. You're his accomplice, whether you knew it or not. She stared at the photos, at the documents, her perfect manicured nails tapping anxiously against the table. Finally, she whispered, if I talk, he'll kill me. I leaned forward, held her gaze. If you stay silent, he'll keep killing people like my daughter. Maybe not literally, not right away, but piece by piece until there's nothing left. And then one day, when you're not useful anymore, he'll do the same to you. I stood up, left $20 for both our coffees, and placed a business card on the table with a number to my prepaid phone. You have 48 hours to decide which side of this you want to be on when it all comes down. I walked out, leaving her sitting there with evidence of her own destruction spread across the cafe table. Finding a lawyer in a small town where half the population thinks your daughter is lying isn't easy, but I found one. Martin Reeves worked out of a cramped office above a hardware store, handled divorces and property disputes, nothing glamorous. He was in his 60s, wore suits that had seen better decades, but his eyes were sharp and he listened without judgment as I laid out everything. The hospital records, the photographs with timestamps, the neighbor's doorbell footage, the threatening note in its plastic sleeve, the financial documents showing attempted fraud, and finally, the statement Christina had given me 2 days after our cafe meeting. She'd called the prepaid number at 3 in the morning, terrified and crying, and agreed to tell the truth. Martin looked at the evidence spread across his desk and said, "This is solid, really solid. But you need to understand, that man has charm and money and half this town in his pocket. This won't be easy." I understood. The hearing was set for a Thursday morning, and the courthouse filled like it was a county fair. Small towns don't get much drama, so when they do, everyone shows up. I saw familiar faces in those wooden benches. People I'd worked with, neighbors I'd waved to for years, the cashier from the grocery store. Most of them weren't there to support us. They were there for the spectacle. And judging by the sympathetic looks directed at my son-in-law as he entered, they'd already chosen their side. He wore an expensive navy suit, probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, and brought a lawyer from the city who looked like he ate small-town attorneys for breakfast. Slick back hair, designer briefcase, the kind of confidence that comes from winning. My daughter sat beside me, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white, and I could feel her trembling. The son-in-law's lawyer started strong, painting a picture of a troubled marriage where both parties shared blame. He claimed my daughter bruised easily, citing no medical evidence, just conjecture. He suggested the fight was mutual, that perhaps she'd struck first and he'd merely defended himself. Then he pivoted, looking directly at me with theatrical concern, suggesting I was a grieving widower who'd grown too attached to his daughter, who saw threats where none existed, who was really after his client's business assets out of some misguided protective instinct. It was masterful, really. He took every piece of truth and twisted it just enough to plant doubt. They brought up embarrassing details from my daughter's past, a speeding ticket from college, a credit card she'd maxed out in her 20s, as if any of that justified what had been done to her. I watched the townspeople nodding along, whispering to each other, and felt the rage building again. But I kept my face neutral. Martin had coached me. Show emotion, but don't explode. Let the evidence speak. The judge, a woman named Patricia Holland who I'd never met but had heard was fair, asked the standard questions. Medical records were entered into evidence. Photos were displayed. The threatening note was examined. Then Judge Holland asked the question that changed everything. Does anyone present have direct knowledge of a pattern of violence or fraudulent activity beyond what's been documented here? The courtroom went silent, and then the door at the back creaked open. Every head turned as Christina walked in, wearing a simple black dress, no makeup, looking smaller and younger than she had at the cafe. The whispers erupted immediately. People recognized her, knew she was a mistress, and the judgment was instant. But she walked to the front, was sworn in, and took the stand. Her voice shook at first, but Martin guided her gently through the testimony. She admitted the affair, admitted she believed the lies he told her about my daughter being abusive, about needing protection from a crazy wife. Then she testified that he'd bragged to her, late at night after too many drinks, about teaching his wife a lesson she wouldn't forget. That he'd laughed about it. She produced text messages where he discussed forging my daughter's signature on financial documents, moving assets, creating a paper trail that would give him access to money that wasn't his. She testified that he'd promised her a share of an inheritance, my late wife's life insurance policy that had gone to our daughter, and that he'd casually mentioned more than once that if my daughter had an accident, everything would be easier. The courtroom erupted. The judge had to bang her gavel 3 times to restore order. The son-in-law's expensive lawyer tried to discredit her, called her a scorned woman seeking revenge. But the text messages were right there, timestamps matching her story, his number verified. Finally, Martin called me to the stand. I'm not eloquent. I don't have fancy words or legal training. I sat in that chair and spoke as plainly as I knew how. I'm not a lawyer, I said, looking at Judge Holland. I fix machines for a living. I troubleshoot problems, find what's broken, and repair it. But even I know the difference between a man who loses his temper once, who makes a terrible mistake and shows genuine remorse, and a man who enjoys breaking someone weaker than him. Who plans it? Who laughs about it? My daughter didn't provoke anything. She survived something. And if we don't hold him accountable now, with all this evidence, then we're telling every abuser in this town that charm matters more than truth. I stepped down. The courtroom was silent now, all the earlier whispers gone. Judge Holland looked at the evidence one more time, then at my son-in-law, then at my daughter. I'm ready to issue my decision, she said. Judge Holland didn't hesitate. She looked at my son-in-law with the kind of cold clarity that comes from seeing through every polished lie, and issued her ruling. Full protection order for my daughter. He was forbidden from any contact, direct or indirect. Every fraudulent document was nullified, declared void, the forgeries officially recognized for what they were. And then she did what mattered most. She referred the case to the district attorney with a recommendation for criminal prosecution on charges of domestic violence, fraud, and attempted theft. The expensive lawyer tried to argue for bail conditions, for leniency, but the evidence was overwhelming. 3 weeks later, I stood across the street from the courthouse and watched through light rain as they led him out in handcuffs. He wasn't wearing the expensive suit anymore, just orange. His eyes scanned the small crowd that had gathered, fewer people this time, the spectacle having lost its appeal, and for a brief moment, they landed on me. I didn't smile, didn't gloat, just exhaled, a breath I felt like I'd been holding since that night at 1 a.m. when my daughter collapsed on my porch. The town shifted after that, the way communities do when they realize they've backed the wrong horse. Neighbors who'd whispered in grocery stores now avoided eye contact when they saw me, or offered awkward apologies that felt more about their own guilt than genuine remorse. I accepted them without comment. I wasn't interested in making people grovel. I was interested in my daughter healing. And healing, I learned, doesn't happen on a courtroom timeline. The protection order and criminal charges gave us safety and justice, but they didn't erase what had been done. My daughter started therapy twice a week with a counselor 2 towns over, somewhere she didn't have to worry about running into people who doubted her. There were nights I'd wake to hear her crying through the bedroom wall, nights she'd wake screaming from nightmares where he was still there, still hurting her. I'd make tea and sit with her in the kitchen at 2, 3 in the morning, not saying much, just being present while she worked through the trauma that doesn't leave just because the abuser does. But slowly, in increments so small I almost missed them, she started coming back. One morning I found her in the kitchen actually cooking breakfast instead of just picking at toast. She made pancakes, something she used to love before the marriage, and the smell filled the house with a warmth I'd forgotten. A few weeks later, I heard her laughing, really laughing, at something on her phone while sitting on the porch in the afternoon sun. It wasn't the cautious, performative laugh of someone pretending to be okay. It was real. Then came the evening she walked through the door with a brightness in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. "Dad," she said, barely able to contain her excitement. "They hired me. The library downtown. It's just part-time to start, but they hired me." I hugged her, felt her hug back without flinching, and knew we'd turned a corner. I still carry guilt. I replay that wedding day, that handshake, wondering what I missed, what signs I ignored. Therapy, my own this time, is helping me understand that abusers are experts at hiding who they are, that my trust wasn't foolishness but humanity. But the guilt sits there anyway, a scar that probably won't fully fade. What helps is the small moments. Like last Tuesday evening, when I was reading the paper and heard her in the kitchen doing dishes, singing softly to herself. Nothing dramatic, just a half-remembered song from the radio, slightly off-key. But it was life. It was hope. It was the sound of someone who'd been buried alive, finally learning to breathe again. I need to tell you something before we end this. Some details in this story have been changed. Names, places, small circumstances. But the core of what I've shared with you is real. It's drawn from patterns I've witnessed, lived through, and heard from others who've walked similar paths. I'm speaking now not just as the father in this story, but to any father, any mother, any family member watching this right now. If your daughter, your son, your sister, your friend shows up at your door at 1 a.m. broken and afraid, believe them. Don't wait for perfect proof. Don't worry about what the neighbors will think or whether the person they're accusing seems too nice to do such things. Abusers count on our hesitation, our politeness, our unwillingness to make waves. They build their protection not with truth but with charm and social capital. You don't need a badge to gather proof. You don't need legal expertise or investigative training. You just need the courage not to look away, the patience to document what's in front of you, and the determination to stand with the person who trusted you enough to collapse on your doorstep when they had nowhere else to go. So I'm asking you directly, if you were in my place, would you risk your reputation, your friendships, even your safety to protect your child? Would you be willing to stand alone against an entire community that chose comfort over truth? Think about that answer. And if this story resonated with you, if you know someone who needs to hear it, share it. Leave a comment telling me what you would do, or just let me know you're listening. Sometimes knowing we're not alone is what gives us the courage to act. I've linked 2 more stories below that continue exploring these themes. Stories about people who refused to stay silent, who gathered their evidence and fought back against systems designed to protect the powerful instead of the vulnerable. Watch them. They might open your eyes, and maybe, just maybe, give someone the push they need to finally speak up.